Hey guys, Matthew Saunders here again. I'm doing another virtual author reading today. I'm going to be reading again from Daughters of Shadow and Blood, Book 1, Yasamin, the first book in my trilogy about the Brides of Dracula. And today I'm going to be reading from chapter 4, actually. That's the first chapter that we see Yasamin in the past in her life before she met Dracula. So, and then after that, I want to geek out about a few things that you might find interesting that are going on in this chapter. So, with that said, let me go ahead and get started here. Chapter 4, Buddha, Ottoman Hungary, 8 Safar 10,008, the 20th of August 1599, Old Style. Yasamin watched the pillar of wax dwindle until it could no longer nourish the tiny flame dancing atop. Sunrise would not come for several more hours, but she couldn't sleep. She cracked the door and slipped out of the room. The light from the waning moon dusted the silent passageways in pallid light, enough for her to make her way, though twice she became lost in the unfamiliar corridors and had to retrace her steps. Cool air brushed her face as she stepped onto one of the many narrow dirt paths threading through the harm-lit garden. She breathed deeply and smiled, though the palace's stone facades would not allow her to forget she was still confined to the harm-lit. The open air relieved the immediate feeling that she might at any moment suffocate. The older women had tried to make her room as welcoming and comfortable as they could. Stuffed with silk and satin pillows, her chambers were larger than her old room in her uncle's house in Salonika. She even brought with her the tapestry her mother had made of the little mosque in the woods, but no matter what anyone did, she would never call Buddha home. The path led to the same place as all the others, a central clearing dominated by an ancient oak tree. It was so wide it took 4 people touching fingertip to reach all the way around. Yasamin sat with her back to its immense trunk and stared into the still blackness of the small pine next to the tree. The tears surprised her when they came. She should have been happy. Her fondest wish had come true, the one she had made so many times, to leave Salonika and be the wife of an important man, not just the only niece of an unimportant public official. As she sat under the old oak, she wanted more than anything to take that wish back. She cried until her tears dried up. She rose to return to her room, but froze when a pebble went skittering down the opposite bank of the pond toward the glassy smooth water that mirrored the clear night sky. With a small splash, the tiny stone sent silver ripples across the surface of the pine, shattering the moon's reflection. Yasamin stared across the water to find someone standing on the path. Her heart leapt into her throat, but it took Yasamin a mere second to recognize Ayla, another resident of the Harmlik. Yasamin was certain the relief on Ayla's face reflected her own. She motioned for Ayla to join her, though truth be told, she wanted nothing more than to be left alone. "You scared me nearly to death," Yasamin whispered once the two of them were seated under the old oak tree together. "My apologies," Ayla replied. "I didn't mean to frighten you. I didn't expect anyone else to be out here in the middle of the night. I couldn't sleep. I thought it would be a good place to come and think." Yasamin paused, struggling for something more to say. She had met Ayla only once before in passing and was unsure what etiquette demanded in the current situation. She knew Ayla was around 17, a year younger than she was, and that she was the daughter or niece of one of the chief advisors to Ahmed Pasha, Buddha's governor. Beyond those paltry facts, she knew nothing. Such matters of decorum, however, didn't seem to worry Ayla. "So what is it you come here to think about?" Yasamin could have chosen not to answer. She could have demurred or told Ayla it was none of her business, but instead she told the truth. "I'm not happy here." "But you're about to marry Murad Pashazadeh," Ayla protested. "How could you not be happy to marry the son of a pasha?" "It's not him," Yasamin motioned around. "It's this place. I'm not happy here. It's nothing like where I came from. I wanted for so long to leave, to be away from my aunt and her rules. Now I find myself actually missing Salonika. I miss the smell of the sea and the blue of the water on a clear day, and the most beautiful blue you could imagine. There at least I had my pick of satins and silks, or if I wanted I could sit in the afternoon sun and eat citrons until they made me sick." The relief at saying it out loud passed over Yasamin like a fresh breeze. She wanted to tell Ayla everything. "Tonight is not the first time I've slipped out of my room," she continued. "On the first night I was here, I came to the garden. These pomegranate trees are from Greece. We had ones like them in our garden at home. I thought if I closed my eyes and touched the bark or held a bunch of flowers in my hand, I could forget where I was. Yasamin sighed. I was wrong. How? I couldn't plug my ears to the night noises. The wind that blows through the trees is coarse, not like the gentle breezes of the sea. The insects drone at a pitch that seems off to my ears. The wolves howl closer. I should be in Izmir or even Istanbul, but instead I'm here, marrying a man I know nothing about. I hear Murad Pashazadeh is a good man. Then you've heard more than I have. Yasmin's soon-to-be husband remained an enigma to her. She gleaned from the gossip within the Haremlik that he tended to shut himself up in his rooms for days on end, that he usually refused to speak but a few words whenever he did present himself, and that often those words were poorly chosen. In one story, he embarrassed a guest of his father, a celebrated general, by pointing out the mistakes the general had made in a particular battle. Even Murad's own mother spoke of him as an idea or a notion rather than a man. On the other hand, stories of Murad's younger half-brother Selim were universal in their praise. He was an accomplished horseman and a swordsman, and as young as he was, he had already led soldiers to victory in battle against the Christian armies threatening Buda. By all accounts, Selim was also a swaggering boor, but everyone knew he was a swaggering boor, and he didn't pretend to be otherwise. If she had to be trapped in Buda, Yasmin thought, she would prefer Selim to Murad. She almost told Ayla so, but before she could, she heard a noise. As one, she and Ayla turned towards the sound. Someone else approached on the path. The two of them rounded the oak tree and crouched as deeply into the darkness as they could. Still, as the figure drew nearer, Yasmin couldn't resist peeking around the trunk of the tree. A tall, lanky man taking long, slow strides passed on the path. He had tucked his robes into his belt, revealing his baggy trousers. He wore only a mustache, not the beard Yasmin was accustomed to seeing on most men. A fabric-draped cylindrical hat adorned with a feather rested on his head. He didn't notice Yasmin or Ayla as he passed by. A janissary, Yasmin said, after he was a safe distance away. How do you know? Ayla asked. I watched them walking down the street outside my home in Salonika countless times, Yasmin replied. What is he doing in the Haremlik? He should know he's not allowed. Yasmin struggled. She knew members of the Janissary Corps were supposed to remain celibate, thinking only of fighting for the Sultan. But underneath the uniform, they were still men. She herself had been tempted more than once to try to catch the eye of one passing by. If some young girl had caught this Janissary's attention, he could very well have considered the risk of being found within the Haremlik to be worth the reward. Let it be his problem, she said. We should go back. It will be light soon. As they stepped back onto the path, Yasmin's eyes briefly came to rest on the spot across the pond's glassy water. She thought she saw a flicker of a shadow, but once she looked again, the pale moon light illuminated only the trees and the flowers and the grassy banks of the black pond. Nothing more. Okay, we'll stop there today. So, again, that was Yasmin in the past before she met Dracula. Her story takes place basically when the Ottoman Empire was at the height of its power. They had sieged Vienna in the 1530s, which didn't work out. They were repelled from that, but at this time, they still control pretty much most of Hungary, including Buda, the historical capital, which is half of the modern-day city of Budapest. So that's where we are politically right now in this story. The governor Pasha of Buda is a very powerful person because he's on the front lines of the war with the Ottoman Empire, or with the Holy Roman Empire that's going on right now, and that begins to play a bigger role in the story as we move along. You also heard about the Janissaries in that chapter, who are the elite soldiers for the Ottoman Empire. They were often taken as young boys from their families and trained their entire lives to be soldiers. They were technically slaves of the Sultan, even though some of them actually went on to become very wealthy and very high-ranking in Ottoman society. They are supposed to be celibate, but we all know how that goes sometimes. And I mentioned in there that the janissary they saw was just wearing a mustache. They weren't allowed to actually have beards like most Ottoman men did. They were just allowed to have a mustache, which is an interesting way of distinguishing them. See, the other interesting thing, and this is just me being a nerd, is the date at the beginning. For all the chapters in the past in the book where Yasamin is, I dated in the Islamic calendar, because she's Muslim. The Ottoman Empire is a Muslim state, and so that tends to distinguish her in the past. And then you may have noticed I also put in the date in the Western calendar, but it had Old Style after it, which is just a fancy way of saying the Julian calendar. The Gregorian calendar was developed by Pope Gregory the 13th, and went into effect in around 1580 something. But it was only adopted at first by the Catholic countries in Europe. Ottoman Empire, obviously not a Catholic country. The Christians who lived in the Ottoman Empire continued to use the Julian calendar, which is why I put those dates in the past in the Julian calendar as well. Another thing that you may have noticed in that chapter is the word haremlik, which is very similar to the word harem, which we all know. But I wanted to kind of avoid using that word because for modern Western readers, that word tends to conjure up visions of the Sultan and his wives and concubines in the palace, and that's really not accurate. Historically, a harem is basically just all the women who live in the household, so it would have included the Sultan's daughters, his mother, his daughters-in-law, in this case, just basically just any of the women in the household. And I didn't want to, I was afraid I might confuse people if I used that word. So instead I used the word haremlik, which is the word for the physical place in the palace where the women live, their residence in the palace. Which leads me to one more thing I was going to mention is if you are interested at all in how to pronounce the Turkish words and names that I use, I have on my website a sort of very brief guide to Turkish pronunciation. If you go jmsaunders.com, if you click on books and click on Daughters of Shadow and Blood, at the bottom I have a list of sort of extras that I include about the books, and one of those is the guide to Turkish pronunciation, and you can read that and figure out how to pronounce the names that pop up in the book. So for now, I will leave you there. Next time, I'm going to be reading from book 2 in this series. So until then, just remember to be careful of the shadows. See you then.